Thank you very much for asking myself and other colleagues to join this really important meeting, sharing our experience of landscape scale vegetation fires and discussing that in that landscape scale context, which is really, really important for us. So hopefully you can see my screen. I'll take a nod from Caitlin if that's the case. Yes, great, I'll then move on. As a civil servant, I'm under purdah until obviously the 4th of July, so I will be very limited in the questions I can answer. My colleague Gail, though, no doubt will be able to look at a much broader view of issues, as she's not on the same restrictions. So I've stuck to the facts, and that's how we were going to be today. I've done a quick overview of the Forestry Commission just to set the scene, if that's okay. So we were established as a result of the Great War, yesterday being the launch of the Somme offensive, so that's really pertinent in our minds. In 1919, so we're over 105 years old now. Forestry Commission is a non-ministerial department, what's called an arm's length body. We are obviously the commission. The commission is the government responsible for protecting, enhancing, and promoting sustainable management of woodlands, and our job's really to regulate, incentivise, and protect. We also have two agencies: Forestry England, the largest landowner in England with over 1,000 forests, and landscape scale working is critical to their business. So very much they're focused on people, wildlife, and timber. Finding that balance at the end of the day, I'll touch a bit more about that in a second. And Forest Research, our agency, obviously our experts in forestry research in Great Britain and also working with our colleagues in Northern Ireland, looking at a wide range of issues there to address, and very much part of our little team. So just to give you an idea of the landscapes cover of forestry in England, I'm showing here in purple the the public woodlands, and in green the private sector. As you can see, vast majority of our forestry landscapes are in private ownership, but we get a massive amount of visitors to our forests over the years. So this little diagram here shows that at the end of the day, and that variates between summer and winters. In terms of Forestry Commission, Forestry Commission looks at natural capital across its landscape. It manages this large mass of 1,000 woodlands, and that's valued around about £61 billion in terms of its natural capital. That's in 2022. The vast majority of that's made up from recreation and leisure, people actually accessing our scene. So forestry in landscape terms is really, really important. That connectivity of access land and ability is really important, but obviously carbon sequestration, and the vast majority of that carbon is in our soils, not in our trees. Forestry carbon sequestration is limited, but actually our soils are critically important. So therefore, working in partnership with our colleagues across the landscape is critically important to our business at the end of the day. We've had a UK forestry standard since 1998. I've known nothing different in my forestry career. This is a critically important document for looking at landscape scales, but it means that foresters have to balance at least 8 different competing objectives. There's general forestry practice, biodiversity, climate change, historic environment, landscapes, people, soils, and water. That is what a forester is focused on. Not just one thing, but 8 things in their working day, finding that landscape scale balance to all these issues. And we provide some guidance to both the public and private sector through guidelines and a range of things. But for wildfires, we look particularly at contingency planning and in particular climate change for wildfires. That's what I'm focused on. Forestry Commission delivers a wide range of accredited training to the private sector and to our staff as well as the public sector. And we issue these LANTRA accredited courses, which have been very, very popular over the last 3 years. So what are the main challenges of forest fires, particularly in this landscape context? Well, let's put things into perspective. So England's fire and rescue services over a 12-year period have attended around about 362,000 wildfire incidents, but only 3% of those have been over 1 hectare in size. So on average, we have about 30,000 ignitions per year, which result in a wildfire. 79,000 hectares of land has been burnt over that 12 years. That's around about 6-7 hectares per annum. And over 500,000 hours fire and rescue service time is spent responding to these incidents. It's a huge amount of resource, around about 45,000 hours per year. And wildfire is episodic in its nature, which no doubt Gail will touch on later on. Our key years in the last 12 years have been 2010, 11, and obviously more recently 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. However, if we'd have reached back further in time, we can talk about 2006, 2003, 1995, 76, etc. So episodic in its nature. So by the time we forget about wildfires, they're back on us again. So it's really, really important we understand that. April seems to be our key presently our key wildfire month. However, that would change due to climate change. So July and June are then our next more challenging months. And in terms of impact, because although I've talked about numbers and I've talked about area, impact is the most critical factor, particularly at landscape scale working. So in terms of environmental impact, around about 28,000 hectares of SSSI or NUTS 2000 sites for our colleagues in Europe have been burned. Of that, of those numbers that I'm giving you, about 14% of wildfires in England occur in woodlands. And actually, it's actually far more fires occurring in broadleaf woodlands than there are coniferous woodlands. However, coniferous woodlands account for a larger area burn, just proportionally. So we have to ask ourselves the question very, very clearly, what is burning? And that really does open up a whole range of interesting questions which we need to address if we want to be effective at a landscape scale. Launched last year in May in Portugal was the landscape scale fire governance framework. Really important document for you guys and girls to read in relation to this. It gives us a really good structure about how we should be going about things. Critical, this is international cooperation because wildfire is a global issue, not just a regional or local issue. How governance is done, risk assessment, risk evaluation, risk management, stakeholder engagement, and systemic and public communications are critical factors, and it gives some idea. Fortunately, in the UK, we have the integrated emergency management system, which very much reflects this. So anticipation, assessment, prepare, prevent, respond, and recover. So that's how the Cabinet Office drive things for us in central government. That seems to work very well for us in this agenda. And because I'm under Purdue, I'm just going to stick to some facts. So I thought I'd reach out to a recent document launched actually in April this year. It's Wildfire Risks to UK Landscapes. So keeping on that theme of landscapes going in here. So number one on its kind of recommendations was actually Fire and Rescue Service investment in wildfire training and equipment that varies across the country according to assessment of local risks. Climate models suggest an increasing risk for future climate change, and that's particularly notable in the southeast of England under the increasing summer wildfires moving forward from the 2040s and 2050s. But actually the biggest impact will be felt in the north of the country, where the baseline is actually a lot lower. So that's a really subtle, nuanced thing we've got to understand. That was some work done by Nigel Arnell et al. In preparation for the climate change risk assessment. However, this Fire Rescue Service practitioners should work further with land managers to invest in training and equipment and should strengthen the capabilities or capacity of Fire Rescue Service to respond to evolving wildfire threats. And this is a recommendation for a wide range of stakeholders across the land management fire sectors. So Forestry Commission delivers 4 training courses at present, Lantra accredited. We've got a view to another 5 courses in the future. And these are about building evidence. These will help Gail and the team there actually getting down to those really nitty-gritty questions of what that impact is and how do we address that impact. These are all underpinned with continual professional development. There's a competency framework attached to it, linked to the Forest Industry Safety Accord approach, refresher training and endorsement by partners as well to this training amount of time. So we have a foundation course, an operator course, somebody with nights fires or suppresses fires, the land management sector. Note, we're not called firefighters, we're operators. How we can better improve prescribed fire management planning, and obviously wildfire management plans. These plans could be at the site or at the landscape scale level. So really important that they join there. Future courses, observer, behaviour analyst, leadership roles, investigator, which I'll touch on in a minute, and also liaison. Around about 1,600 modules delivered today, not just in the land management sector, not just across biodiversity or conservation and forestry, but actually a very broad field, gamekeepers as well, but also academics as well. We've trained a lot of academics actually in this training, so they had their first actually accredited award. So very, very keen to carry on that programme. You can start seeing the very manual nature of what we are doing, as well as the knowledge side that we're imparting as well. Liaison officer, direct link to that request in there in the document about how do we better land managers engage with our Fire Rescue Service colleagues. So we have a Lantra accredited liaison officer training module which we're looking to develop. That's done in initiative in partnership with Forestry Commission, National Fire Chiefs Council, and a gentleman called Wildfire TAC, Andy Elliott. And we have a business case formed and a project plan in place. And with 27 stakeholders engaged across a wide range of sectors in the UK and Republic of Ireland, we deliver not just in the UK, Republic of Ireland and UK overseas territories as well across the world. We have lots of support from a wide range of bodies to show the kind of desire of people to get this improve this kind of landscape scale working across their organisations. The next recommendation was around hazard assessment, and this I'm going to bring Gail and the team in here on this particular one. The UK lacks currently a dynamic fire risks hazard risk assessment system tailored to our fuel types. Researchers and practitioners suggest that building public facing and FRS and land management orientated fire danger rating system could reduce accidental ignitions. I talked about that 30,000 a year. Canada only has 6,000. That's the scale, the challenge that we have here to aid wildfire suppression. So obviously our colleagues here in a NERC-funded award, of which is a broad range of different universities towards a UK fire danger rating system, which Gail and the colleagues have involved. I don't want to go any more detail, Gail, so you can elaborate on that. And then follow-on project, again, NERC-funded as well, Ideal Fire UK as well. So a lot of research going on in this area about how do we address both site and landscape scale working. The third recommendation was around fire investigation. Currently, we do not have wildfire investigators who are specifically trained to address this issue. And that means actually we struggle to understand actually why ignitions occur. The cause, the motive and the origin. Are they deliberate? Are they accidental? We need to understand those things. Or are they malicious? And that will help target our communication campaigns and also probably help us improve suppression approaches as well. Forestry Commission took the initiative on this and actually then seconded in Roger E. Jones from Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service for 4 months to write a report on this issue. His conclusions were based around greater research, better awareness through article seminars and educational events, and then the training and upskilling of staff. And that final recommendation or conclusion we took forward actually to build what is called a LANTRA Wildfire Investigations Training Module. This is also linked to the National Adaptation Programme, free, links across a wide range of different things, forestry and peatlands. The National Recording System, which is in evolution right now in the Fire Rescue Service, the NSCC National Reporting Tool, the Wildfire Framework for England, which is done by the Home Office. Obviously, Natural England research papers which underpin this, the action plans both peat and for trees, the Environmental Improvement Plan, the Scottish Forestry Strategy and Climate Ready Scotland. So it's a shame that Bruce is not here today, but this is a kind of a fully UK approach. And we've developed, based on Roger's report, a business plan and business case and project plan, which we're waiting for support on for funding. And a lot of support, particularly, most importantly, from the UK Association of Fire Investigators. And we'll develop both national occupational standards and 2 training courses in the future. So the last and final recommendation from the landscape scale report was to look at stakeholder debate on the likely effects of changing landscape scale management to wildfire risk in our UK habitats, as there's insufficient evidence that currently exists on establishing defined definitive outcomes or definitive answers. The application of international evidence is limited because of our unique habitats in the UK. So we can use concepts, but actually we need to ground them, which Gail no doubt will talk about later on. Commentators suggest that addressing this evidence gap could inform adaptation to future wildfire risks. So as part of that, in the National Adaptation Programme, Forestry has an action to look at adaptation of land management in wildfire risk programme. It's a project that I'm currently leading. And also research on a wide range of issues. An England wildfire risk map that links back towards the UK FDRS. Wildfire risk reduction measures, the cause and motive of vegetation fires, and I've touched on earlier in the earlier presentation. Better statistical analysis of wildfire incidents. The Forestry Commission analyses all the data in England presently to give a national picture to a wide range of sectors. So we need to improve on that. Social, economic and environmental impacts. I went back to that keyword again. Impact is critical for wildfire, not just numbers, not just area. And vegetation fire observers and behaviour analysts, both products and protocols, to help improve our evidence base. People like Gail can do the amazing work that they do with a whole range of different tools. That's me done. Caitlin, hopefully I've set the scene for Gail, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them from colleagues. Over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Rob. That was really interesting and a fantastic introduction. I think it really sets the scene for Gail's presentation. So we have time for questions, if anybody wants to raise their hand, or you can type in the chat.
Everyone's being very polite, aren't they?
Whilst we're, people are digesting that, I have a question of my own, if that's okay. So you talked about the ignition sources. I was just wondering, when a wildfire occurs, how can like how certain can you be about the source of that wildfire?
With the training, once we have the training, probably very, very confident. So in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and United States, they actually have accredited training for wildfire investigation. The first course is very much to preserve the scene. So firefighters, when they go in and start cutting things down and stuff, they'll kind of identify roughly that something had happened here. And preserving that scene is critically important for the next phase. And that next phase is a professional wildfire investigator to come in, and then they will try to understand what has occurred in this area. Has it been deliberate? Is it malicious, or is it accidental? And that builds up a story. They define the origin, the point of origin of the fire, and then from that they can then determine the motive for that fire. Now that's really important because that may lead to a criminal prosecution. So you need to have a broad amount of evidence to do that at the end of the day. But also it helps in tell us actually what do we need to look for? Do we need to engage with a certain community, or do we need to do simple things like actually clean our tractors after we've used them so they don't catch fire, which is what happened in 2022. So these kind of things are really, really important for us to determine. It just makes us much more evidence-based rather than reactive to what are potentially myths about how these things start. So yeah, it gets us much more focused. Cool. I think Catherine has a question there. That's answered your question.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe I'll read the question out for everybody. So what are your early findings around the economic and social impacts of wildfires? Are there any particular patterns of cascading impacts or areas of focus?
So to be honest, Catherine, it's an area which is massively under-researched. So we struggle with economic and social impacts of fire. So what recently the HEC report, which is the follow-on from the climate change risk assessment from the UK Health Security Agency, looked in some detail at the health impacts of wildfires. And what we're discovering is that it can be quite broad. So we take Saddleworth fire that happened in 2018. What we are seeing is significant negative health impacts across quite a broad landscape area at the end of the day. So imagine a smoke plume going up. We're not just looking at the immediate area community, it actually can be many, many tens, not hundreds of miles down. We go back to Storm Ophelia in 2016, the terrible Portugal fires, which claimed the lives of 60 people. We were seeing ash dropping on the UK from those Portuguese and northern Spanish fires. So intertransnational fire pollution is an issue. And if you look at the fires, particularly in British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and down to California, pretty much that whole area in 2015, 2016 was, you couldn't see any further because the whole of the side of a continent was completely smoked out. So we're working at massive landscape scales, tens of millions of hectares. So that social element is critically important to lots of our future decision making when it comes to wildfires. The economic side, very, very important to start monitorizing these kind of things so we can understand the impacts not just on local but national, particularly when it comes to like train lines being closed, motorways being closed, telecommunications being disrupted, etc., etc. Those are the kind of things that we need to consider at that landscape scale. So Catherine, I'm really sorry not to answer your question. Yeah, so Hannah's asked a question around insight into the proportion of trees typically getting burnt. So it's not, as you rightly point out, from emissions point of view, we don't consider 100% tree burn. That's just about near impossible to do because trees are full of carbon and they turn into carbon once you burn them. So it depends on the size of the tree and the species of the tree. It's an area which we are growing to and understanding. So it's a proportional loss of the tree itself in terms of the impact, particularly from a carbon point of view. So yeah, large trees actually quite resilient. Scots pine been adapted to wildfire for tens of millions of years. Its bark has been adapted to that environment. Other species less so. Let's take ash for example. Very thin bark can be adversely impacted upon it. Hasn't adapted to wildfire as much as what Scots pine would have done if I'd used those two crude examples at the moment in time. But obviously younger Scots pine trees more likely to higher fatality rate than the mature ones themselves. And actually fire is an important part of their ecosystem. So once the fire's been through, suddenly you get massive germination. So actually it's an amazing opportunity for something like Scots pine, a pioneer species, birch, another pioneer species as well. So fire forms a very much important part of their ecosystem. Any other questions?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So we'll take one more question. So James, you have your hand up.
There we go. Hi, thanks, Rob. That was super interesting. If I remember rightly, in your stats there, you had 10 years of data, and you said, I think, only 3% of wildfires are larger than 1 hectare, which is, okay, that's great. 97% are small there. Do you know, or can you say more about where those 3% larger fires happen and when? Is it, what's the kind of most important aspect? Is it fuel continuity, or is it climate, or is it inaccessibility to fight the fire?
So great, thanks, James. So I'd like 12 years of data. So 3 key reasons why those fires aren't getting bigger. One, there isn't the fuel to burn. So, for example, it's on the side of a verge, a few square meters is all that's available to burn. Secondly, the excellent work by our fire and rescue services getting there, that initial attack to keep fires small, really, really important. Massively important, has been shown across the world that that's an important intervention. And then thirdly, and most importantly, is the condition of the fuel. So in some cases, those fires would have never got much bigger, but the vegetation wasn't able to combust, because combustion is a 2-process cycle. You've got to get temperature up and you've got to sustain it. And it can't be sustained is the issue here. And that's really, really important, because what we are going to see with climate change is that fuel conditions are going to change. So what is currently 3% may well increase, particularly if you go back to 19th of July 2022. Lots of ignitions, roughly around the same time, resulted in 12 fire and rescue services declaring major emergencies for lack of resources. We were overwhelmed on the east coast of England. So we are on an interesting journey from a landscape scale fire working point of view. And that's where the investigation is so important, to get down to what is the cause, the motive, and the origin of these incidents. We can be much more effective and intelligent about how we combat that situation. And then we talk about fire management now, wildfire management, rather than fire suppression, because we want to manage wildfires. They've been around about 450 million years. They predate us by, we are just a blip in fire's life. And ever since we've had 16% oxygen in our atmosphere, that's been critically important at the end of the day. So how do we manage this? How do we work with it? Anglo-Saxon Chronicles talks about whole villages being wiped out in the north of England from wildfires. So this has been part of our culture for many years. It's just that for various different reasons, particularly our very managed landscapes over the last 5,000 years, we've managed to reduce the risk in comparison to other countries. However, we're now seeing the impacts of infrastructure in our landscapes and the ignition challenge happening. So I'll leave it there.
That's great. Thank you very much. So if anyone else has any questions in the meantime, you can put them in the chat and we'll come back to them at the end. But for now, we'll move on to Gail, if you're ready.
Okay.
Yeah,
Caitlin,
we can see that. Thank you.
Screen? Okay, wonderful.
Yeah. Thanks.
So thanks, Caitlin, for inviting me to present at the International Association for Landscape Ecology UK and for this Fire Landscapes and the UK webinar. So I'm going to really focus more on, I guess, some of the scientific underpinnings of assessing the risk of wildfire in the landscape. So my presentation today covers the dynamic fuels in the South Pennines. So as we know, fuel dynamics in upland moorlands is an important factor in determining the susceptibility of the landscape to wildfires. So this work that I'm presenting today is a collaborative piece of work at the University of Manchester and from KIT in Germany. The University of Manchester team are funded by the NERC UKFGRS project that Rob has mentioned a few times already in his presentation. So I'll just scroll down here. So what is the UK Fire Danger Rating System project that's been mentioned quite a few times? Well, this project aim is to establish and test the scientific underpinning and key components required to build an effective tailored UK fire danger rating system for use in establishing the likelihood and impact of current and future fire regimes. So this diagram here shows that the project itself is broken down into 6 different work packages. Work package 1 is what I'm going to mainly talk about today, highlighted in purple. So with work package 1, the first part of that work package is to produce a UK fuel map, which my colleague Anna Maria worked on over these past couple of years at the national landscape scale. This was using a combination of different satellite imagery. So imagery from Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2, as well as LiDAR data that had been obtained from a number of different sources, which was available from around the UK. As well as this, the other part of this work package is looking at landscape cover and to develop a site level understanding as well of fuel structure. So I'm going to talk more about that for the South Pennines today. The work package 2 focuses on fuel moisture. This is led by the University of Birmingham. So assessing moisture regimes for key fuel types across the UK landscape. And then work package 3, led by the University of Exeter, is determining the flammability of our fuel types. So looking at the energy content and ignitability of UK fuels to establish UK specific fuel models. So this is a real kind of new part of research that is happening as part of this project. Work package 4 on fire behaviour assessment is led by Swansea University, bringing together outputs from work package 1 and work package 3, so determining the ranges of UK fire behaviour for the different key fuel types. And then work package 5, which you can see in the centre of the diagram here, is around fire statistic assessment, so looking at the incident recording system data, which Rob mentioned. Forest Research has done a lot of work on this. So getting those key data sets from the Home Office, from the Welsh Government, and from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and looking at trends over time. And then finally, work package 6 is really incorporating key stakeholder knowledge and their understanding of wildfire risk by developing wildfire threat analysis for different case studies around the UK. So at the moment, we're working with the South Downs National Park Authority to develop a wildfire threat analysis for the Wilden Heaths area. And we are also looking to do some case studies in the Mourne Mountains and also potentially at Marston Moor as well. So that's looking at 3 different modules, risk of ignition. So what are the risks using different kinds of spatial data of a wildfire igniting, also the values at risk. So looking at the risk to ecosystem services, some of that kind of financial assessment of impact due to wildfire, and also the hazard module, which is around wildfire spread and modelling and assessing that for key case studies around the UK. So that in a nutshell is the UK FDRS project, and these are the different academic institutions that are involved, along with Forest Research as well, who have been incredibly helpful for this work package 1 work for the National Fuel Map. So looking at threats of wildfire in the UK, Rob has already mentioned about, there's this general trend of increasing wildfire activity, and kind of looking at this from a slightly different perspective in terms of Earth observation data. So the European Forest Fire Information System has a current statistics portal. This is developed by Copernicus and the European Commission. And with this current statistics portal, you can pull out key information around number of fires and burn area for the different countries in Europe. And this chart here is capturing the number of fires that are 30 hectares or larger. So this is really looking at those ones that are detected by sort of low spatial resolution satellite data, such as MODIS and VAERS. So you're looking at 500 metre to 350 metre spatial resolution for this satellite data, and detecting then wildfires in the UK. So this, in essence, will probably cream off the larger wildfires, which is what James was asking about at the end of the last talk. And just a caveat to this data, though, some fires that are included in this statistics could be from vegetation management fires, so not true wildfires. So, you know, none of these data sets are perfect. But overall, the trend is that we're seeing an increase in the number of wildfires in the UK, I would say over the past decade, and also in terms of the area burned. There was obviously other key wildfire years which precede this data set, such as what Rob mentioned, the year of 2003 was a significant wildfire year. And of course in 2011 as well, which is shown here on this chart. So we can see from the number of fires here shown in the blue line that there was some key wildfire years, and in terms of area burn in 2018, in 2019, and also in 2022 as well. So I just want to take you to a diagram now that my colleague Tadas Nikonovas at Swansea University put together, where he looked at the maximum daily fire weather index in England. And so the circle is broken down into the months of the year, as you can see here, and then dates going from 2000 in the centre out to 2022 on the outer ring. And what we can see here is that the three maximum fire weather index days are highlighted in July and August of 2022. These had the most severe fire season of this century, and in July 19th was the highest FWI value since the FWI record began in 1979. So this event here in July 2022 was really significant for the UK. There was some real kind of differences taking place than what we've seen before. We can also pull out some of the key wildfire years, such as in 2011 there, and also in 2020. And just really to highlight then what some of the satellite data can bring when these wildfires take place, even for what are fairly small wildfires. This is one for the Chobham Common wildfire in the Heathlands area of the UK that happened on the 7th of August 2020. And the image on the left here is showing a pre-fire true colour Sentinel-2 B image. This was acquired on the 30th of July. Just a week before the wildfire occurred. So you can see there the undisturbed lowland heath vegetation in Surrey. But we can see how close the wildfire at Chobham Common came to the conurbation of Sunningdale to the west here, and also to the M3 motorway to the south. And so what we're seeing here was this kind of creeping in of these wildfires becoming closer to what we call the wildland to urban interface. And of course, what we then saw is a kind of escalation in 2022 of, for the first time, we're seeing in the UK, people's properties being destroyed by wildfire, with the Wennington wildfire that occurred on the 19th of July 2022. As Rob was saying, changes in climate, the changes in the conditions, this was a particularly hot and dry summer period for the south east of England. there was very low relative humidity, creating conditions where there was a very low fuel moisture content. This made vegetation then tinder dry in these areas very close to people's property, making them then making the surrounding vegetation highly flammable, and then obviously causing fire spread into people's properties. So that just kind of giving a context really of the project, and obviously the changing sort of landscape, shall we say, of wildfires, and what's really been happening, which has been quite a eventful few years during the time that this project has been taking place. It began in 2020 and is due to end at the end of this year. So in terms of the research aims for Work Package 1 on dynamic fuels, the changes in fuel availability and condition over time occur as a result of phenological change, land management activities, and also unplanned disturbances such as wildfires. So understanding the annual cycle of key land cover types and their ability to recover is essential to understanding wildfire risks and their impacts. So the aim of this research was to develop a dynamic fuel mapping analysis in the South Pennines based on seasonal change and land cover management using an Earth observation approach. So we were looking at the optical vegetation indices and also synthetic aperture intensity and interferometric SAR. In terms of the objectives of this study, we were aiming to investigate the ability of optical remote sensing time series from Sentinel-2. So that is the Copernicus Sentinel-2 free data, which is an optical sensor for 2017 through to 2023 to capture phenology and vegetation recovery in 4 upland land cover types, these being acid grassland, heather grassland, and bog, and to then investigate land cover dynamics during that time period using as well the radar satellite sensor Sentinel-1A and 1B for the intensity time series for both vertically admitted, vertically received, and vertically admitted, horizontally received polarizations, and then to investigate structural changes of these 4 upland land cover types as well using coherence. So in terms of the study area, this, as many of you may be aware, is the South Pennines area. This is in the northwest of England here, just highlighting here that significant wildfire Rob mentioned before with the big smoke plume over Manchester. I lived that smoke plume that summer of 2018, being based in Manchester myself. The South Pennines covers the Peak District National Park, which is one of the oldest national parks in the UK, and it also extends further north to the Marsden Moor Estate, which was also covered in this analysis. The area is characterised by moorland and gritstone formations in the Dark Peak, which is to the north here, and then to the south, limestone plateaus and gorges dominate what we call the White Peak, where most settlements and farmlands is located. So why did this project focus on the South Pennines? Basically, both the Peak District and Marsden Moor have experienced significant erosion over the landscape in the past decade. And then there's been a significant push for reseeding and gully blocking in these areas from 2003 onwards, which, as Rob mentioned, was a significant wildfire year. And a lot of work has been done by organisations like the Moors for the Future Partnership with European funding. It provides also the most southeasterly geographic range for many blanket bog species found in the UK peat moorlands, and therefore it represents an ecological marginal position in relation to other peat moorlands located further north, so can potentially flag what may happen down the line if our climate is to change. So just moving on to Marsden more specifically, there has been since 2019 over £700,000 worth of damage caused by wildfires on Marsden Moor Estate, with the largest wildfire damaging 705 hectares, which burnt from the 21st of April 2019 through to the 25th of April 2019. So if I just zoom in a bit more on this image here, you can see this is the big 2019 wildfire, which is outlined here by the red perimeter. And then there's been other wildfires that took place. Since then, there was one here at Featherbed Moss in 2020, the following year, and a number as well in 2021 and also in 2022. So there has been a significant amount of wildfire activity at Marsden Moor Estate. So why are these peat moorlands important? The South Pennines blanket bog habitat is home to rare upland species such as the mountain hare, and also red-listed birds of conservation concern such as the skylark, curlew and lapwing. And they play a critical role in sequestering large amounts of carbon. So as Rob has said, you know, one of the big contributors to the release of carbon dioxide by wildfires in the UK is not necessarily from forested areas, but from peaty soils, which are contain large amounts of carbon. As well as that, they provide a vital source of drinking water, 43.1% for the UK population, and are an area for grazing for livestock and a place for recreation activity. We all enjoy going to these areas on the bank holiday. And as part of this research, we focused the analysis in terms of land cover classes using the CH land cover map, the most recent version in 2021. So the amount of vegetation fuel available for combustion depends on plant species and the accumulation of live and dead biomass. And as you can see with the map here, the South Pennines is characterised by heterogeneous land cover with large areas of bog, heather grassland, acid grassland, and improved grassland. So the bog and heather areas are covering more the Dart Peak to the north here, and then the acid grassland, the calcareous and improved grassland tends to be further south where the White Peak is, down here. So the latest CH land cover map, as shown here, was used for sampling both the optical VI vegetation indices, that is, and the SAR intensity and coherence using a stratified sampling approach. This research also required a field campaign. So using a space for time approach, ground truth data was collected in the field. We do acknowledge that there was limitations here, that this campaign didn't take place necessarily when some of these wildfires occurred on the sites, but data was collected on post-fire vegetation recovery in 14 wildfire sites from the 3rd to the 14th of July last year. Permissions for access to the sites was granted by the National Trust Marsden Moor Estate, the Enville and Staley Bridge Estates, RSPB, United Utilities, Moors for the Future Partnership and Staffordshire Wildlife Trust. StandEdge was used as a field data set to capture immediate post-fire response. That wildfire burnt just last year on the 3rd of May, and our first field visit was literally the day after, on the 4th of May. I looked like I'd been sweeping chimneys after that field visit. I was very black because obviously there was a lot of charcoal around. And what we can see with these field sites is there is a big variation in size of these burns. So the Tameside wildfire is there at 1,010 hectares. But, you know, some of these sites were much smaller, just a couple of hectares in size. So there's great variability in terms of the size of these wildfires that are occurring across the Pennines, the South Pennines. So there was 2 to 3 burn sites for each year, and we recorded the vegetation cover and the height. The plot sizes were 10 by 10 meters to try and capture that heterogeneity of the landscape, and also to reflect the spatial resolution of the Sentinel-2 data, satellite data. Sampling was along 3 parallel 10-meter transects positioned at 0, 5 and 10. And then we had 50 centimetre intervals and recorded the different plant groups. So these were recorded as grass, rush, moss, heather, bell heather, bilberry, crowberry and bracken. And also the plant condition was recorded, whether it was live, dead or senescent or charred. So just to kind of give you a bit of an example in the field here, tried to give a bit of a virtual tour using the Standage immediate post-fire fieldwork example. So we have here, if I just go to the first transect. So this was the first quadrat. So quadrat 1, we can see here some of the fire crew walking the site, because this was just the following day after the wildfire. You can kind of see how the charred grasses look and mosses. But on the 7th of June, which was just 1 month after this wildfire had taken place, this is how the same plot looked. So that's our quadrat poles there. I think that's Pia in the background. So, you know, the site had recovered quite quickly. This was on the way to our second quadrat here. We saw the month after a mountain hare, which I was rather excited about and wanted to put that in. On our second quadrat, it was mainly juncus type vegetation. So suggesting kind of wetter vegetation. So we can see here the charred juncus. If I just close that down there. And then we had the recording of the smouldering of the vegetation. This was in May. And so it was quite interesting that even after what had been the active burn, we were still getting what is this smouldering burning, which is very typical of wildfires in these sort of upland peatland areas, that they can smoulder for potentially months after the wildfire has occurred, until there's a really heavy downpour of rain to put these wildfires out and the smouldering out. And then here we can see the sphagnum amongst the grasses here, and how that has become charred, and how the grasses have recovered, but obviously the sphagnum has not a month later. And then some of the senescent grasses in our non-burnt plots, and this was our kind of non-burnt plots outside of the burnt area for Standage. So hopefully that just kind of gives you an idea of how the vegetation is along these burn sites in the peat moorland areas. In terms of the phenological analysis, we use 5 different vegetation indices. Some are probably more well known than others: the normalized difference vegetation index, the soil adjusted vegetation index, the normalized difference moisture index, the plant senescent reflection index, and the normalized burn ratio. So these were the different indices that were extracted from the time series of Sentinel-2 data, and that shows the equations and the key references for each of these, and the key bands that we used from the Sentinel-2 data to create these. So Some of the key phenological findings is that potential vegetation flammability was highest from mid-February to early May in acid grassland, while the flammability window interestingly extended into early June in heather and heather grassland and into late June in bog. So there was, if I just click on the image here, the actual flammability window of the land cover class for bog was the greatest, was the widest, followed by the heathers, and then the acid grassland had the most narrow flammability window from our findings when we did this analysis across the whole of the South Pennines. Changes in remote sense fuel properties were larger after summer fires compared to spring fires, and the largest spectral changes were observed in the moisture-related vegetation indices. So often people use NDVI, but we actually found that the normalized difference moisture index was much more effective. And the soil adjusted vegetation index and normalized difference moisture index showed a strong decrease after summer fires, indicating a greater reduction in live green biomass, which is what you would expect because, you know, the vegetation has greened up, but then if there has been a wildfire, you would see a greater reduction in that green biomass signature. As well as that, spectral recovery of graminoid, so grass dominated land cover, was rapid, less than 1 year. And this did agree well with our field observations that I was just showing of Standedge immediate post-fire field campaign. So grasses did seem to recover very well. Spectral recovery of dwarf shrub dominated areas was slower, requiring up to 3 years. So if I just show the chart here, we can see that acid grassland, the actual day since fire and the recovery was within sort of a year there, but much longer in the bog and the heather. And we can also see this when looking at high spatial resolution satellite data. So there was a unique opportunity to get a Vision 1 image of Marsden Moor. So this is 3.5 meters spatial resolution. And this is showing red, green, blue, and near infrared. And it shows the vegetation greenness here. And what we can see is that burn area that I pulled out earlier that occurred in 2019. On the 2020 Vision 1 image is showing as you know, having a high level of greenness, which indicates that this purple moorgrass dominated area recovers quite quickly after a wildfire. So that was something I just wanted to highlight versus the wildfire that took place in 2020, where we see there these kind of yellow tones indicating that the greenness is lower in that area. In terms of the SAR analysis, this is work that extends previous SAR intensity and INSAR coherence analysis that I conducted in the Peak District National Park back in 2015. That looked at much older burnt areas, such as the one in 2003 in Bleaklow and in Edale in 2008. And the SAR analysis has been extending on. Adam Johnson did a nice piece of work for Dovestone in 2018. And this methodology builds upon this and was co-developed by Samantha Lavender and myself as part of a DEFRA invitation to tender. And it focused on identifying burn scar areas from the Sentinel-1 data. I'm not going to go through the details of this methodology because, as you can see, it's quite it's quite complex. But in essence, this is some of the outputs of the Sentinel-2 time series. So looking at the pre and then post burn images of the Tameside wildfire that took place on the 4th of July 2018. And what we see is that you get a increase in backscatter post-fire after precipitation has occurred, which really helps to detect these burn areas in peat upland areas. And again, it kind of reflects my findings of what I also saw with the older ASAR and ERS data for the Bleaklow 2003 case study. So there definitely is the potential to be using radar for detection of larger burn areas in peat moorlands when there isn't available optical data because of either smoke, cloud cover, which often we get here in the UK. So just wrapping up in terms of next steps, we plan now to extend this analysis, landscape analysis, focusing in more on the radar for those different burn areas that we have already assessed with the optical vegetation indices. We may also consider other variables as well, bringing in things like land management activity using the moorland change map from Natural England and also looking at topography. We then plan to combine the outcomes of the SAR work with the optical sensors to understand wildfire regime and potential wildfire risks for the South Pennines region. So looking at the complete kind of spectrum of Earth observation data that's available to us. So we are currently in the process of submitting a paper on the optical satellite-based analysis of phenology and post-fire vegetation recovery in the UK. And we have a number of other papers planned. Some of these are working with the Marsden Moor volunteers on developing a detailed land cover map using that Vision 1 data that I showed you. So that is something that we're also currently working on as well. If you've got any more questions, please contact Pia or myself. And for the National Fuel Map, Anna Maria is the key contact there. And yeah, we just would like to thank our funders, NERC, also the German Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture as part of the Irwin project, and also the site owners that gave us access to do the field work. And also thanks to Martina Etlin, who also provided significant fieldwork assistance for this work. That's it from me, Caitlin.